So I've had this song in my head all week. It's from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. I won't back down. Now, how many of you are singing it right now in your head? Okay, oh, I know that. Melissa's got her hand up. You might recognize the song if I sing a few verses, a few bars. I think it goes, no, I won't back down, gonna stand my ground. When the world that keeps on pushing me around, but I won't back down, gonna stand my ground. Yeah. Did you know that Johnny Cash sings that song too? He sang it in, I think he had it on his American 3 Solitary Man album in 2000. Tom Petty, when he was not a spring chicken at 39, wrote the song, and Johnny Cash, also not a spring chicken at 67, sang the song. So this is who I hear when I think of Job. I think of a man a bit like Johnny Cash, who had it all and then lost it. I'm going somewhere with that. Don't back down. Just hold it in your head for a bit. But maybe you can listen to it in your head after you listen to a few more words that I have to say. You know the story of Job, of how Job was blessed by God with a smart head on his shoulders, cattle in the field, food on the table, a lovely wife, many, many good children of whom he was very proud. And then, just like that, poof, the most important things in his life were gone, destroyed by a whirlwind. Now his livestock, stolen, and he probably could have dealt with that. His sheep, struck by lightning, he could have handled that too. But his children, and then to top it all off, he's covered in boils. Likely a psychosomatic response to all the stress going on in his life. His wife grieves bitterly, his friends come, and then ultimately blame Job for all that has gone wrong, and they're impatient with his grieving process. There's a good teaching here. How to and how not to walk along someone who is experiencing trauma and grief. I am learning every day that what is most important is not impatience, nor is it frustration with the individual and their grieving process, but patience and silence and a prayerful presence. Criticism, like Job's friends, did not help. So Job grieves. He laments that he couldn't hold it together. He cries, "Why was I ever born?" He constantly pleads for an answer from God. He won't back down. He's going to stand his ground. All the while writhing in both physical pain and grief and fear of what is to come. There are some questions for which there are no answers. At the end of the book of Job, we hear God's response to Job's pleading, and perhaps unasked question, what did I do to deserve this pain? And when God finally speaks, God doesn't answer his questions, which I would think on initial reading is quite frustrating. But God asks questions in return. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you understand. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On What were its bases sunk? Who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy. Can you lift up your voice to the clouds so that a flood of waters will cover you? Can you send forth lightning so that they may go and say to you, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts or given understanding to the mind? Who has the wisdom to number the clouds? Or who can tilt the water skins of the heavens when the dust runs into a mass and clods cling together? Can you hunt the prey for the lion? Or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in their covert? Who provides for the raven its prey when its young ones cry to God and wander about for lack of food? Now God goes on for 4 more chapters to explain to Job the things that Job will never know. God is in control. Even the elements bear God's signature. God holds the birthing cosmos with the same hand that provides food for the young ravens. God has a creating hand in everything, every process, every creature, every weather system on earth, even the clods of dirt and the little bugs that live in it, and certainly in the whirlwind out of which God spoke. A whirlwind like the same wind that smote the home with his children. And what does Job do? He doesn't complain to God. He doesn't complain that God didn't answer him. In fact, I'm sure a little part of him felt honored that God did respond in the first place. He did not grumble. Instead, he humbled himself even more, and God honored him and blessed him. Now, here's something I need to make clear. We are not Job, and Job is not us, nor is he Johnny Cash. It is unlikely, but wouldn't it be wonderful and scary and all of the above if God spoke to us in a whirlwind? One thing that Job's story does do very well, among many things, is that it reminds us of our place. Job's story reminds us that bad things happen, often not as horrible and sometimes even more horrible than Job experienced. Think of what is happening now in Gaza. What did the Palestinian children do to deserve a bombing other than exist? What about all the children in Israel that were killed when Hamas attacked a year ago? No one deserves to be hurt or killed. No one. And what a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. We could probably think of more stories like that. Job's story reminds us that bad things happen. Accidents happen, death happens, sickness happens, abandonment, abuse, neglect, crime, fraud happens. And while we all have some control in how we respond, we can't control the other people, nor can we control the elements. And let me say this again. There are some things that we cannot control. These things are not ours to control. They are God's to control. The God of the universe is just that. The God of the universe, of creation. And this God is far, far more than we could ever imagine. Now, I also need to put an aside here and think that just because God controls the elements does not mean that God has a vindictive attitude towards each of us. So before we start saying, I deserve this punishment, let's just think and listen a little bit more. God is great, and God is good, and we are not God. Job's story reminds us of our place before God. But Job isn't the only story in our Bible that reminds us of our place. In fact, the whole Bible is full of it. Full of stories in which people try to wrest power from God. Starting with Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, the people building the Tower of Babel, Eli and his sons, King Saul, David, Solomon, Rehoboam, Jonah, and the list in the Hebrew Bible goes on. In the New Testament, we have false teachers, the Pharisees, that were more concerned with how they looked than how their heart was, the kings and the rulers of the age, the powers and the principalities. And in our time, too, it continues. What do we claim to own that is not ours to own? What do we want to wrestle from God that is not ours? Adam and Eve's greatest sin was eating from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil because they wanted to be like God. God mixed up the languages to confuse the people who were building a tower to the heavens to be with God. Eli and his sons defiled the temple and thought they wouldn't be seen, but God saw and prophesied to Samuel of their destruction. Solomon decided he was wiser than God. Jonah thought he could run away from God. Many of the religious rulers of Jesus' day thought they could control the status of people based on sickness or gender or who their family was. But Jesus came to teach and to remind people that God so loved the world, the whole world, including the widows and the orphans and the immigrants, rich rulers, centurions, eunuchs, prostitutes, hemorrhaging women, people of leprosy, jailers, children, people with mental illnesses, tax collectors, and even people who he knew would betray him. Job's story and so many other stories in our biblical texts remind us of our place. God doesn't desire us to be perfect. Only God is perfect, and we are not God. But God does desire for us to be genuine. Job's grief and his questioning come from a genuine place from within him. And Job's fundamental question was finally and graciously answered. Yes, Job, I hear you too. I heard your first cry. I heard the voice that spoke creation. I am the voice that spoke creation in you. And in fact, that was my voice. Yes, Job, I hear you now. After a long season of waiting, of silence, of doubt, amidst everyone else's certainty, Job, like Tom Petty's song, refused to back down. See, that's where I'm going with it. He refused to back down. This resulted in a most profound encounter with God, something reminiscent of so many who have struggled with God through the history of God's people. We hear God loving God's people. Now, when I say that, what I don't mean is that the God of the universe mocks and punishes or even condemns us for asking questions or having doubts, or for wondering why things are going the way we are. God does not punish us for asking those questions or having those doubts. consider elsewhere in the Bible when people questioned or argued or railed against God. Think of Jacob, the one who tricked his brother and his father, the one who loved one son more than the other 11, who set his jaw and held on and wrestled with God all night, emerging in the morning with a dislocated hip and a new name and a blessing. Think of the Psalms. One psalm says, "Oh, that you would destroy my enemies." Now, there was parts of the verses, the last verse that Randy read from Psalm 104, that we didn't read today and included a portion, something like that. We don't normally look at those parts of the Psalms, and yet these are still beloved Psalms. These are still words that people pray to God. Oh, that you would punish my enemies. Oh, I am a worm. Why am I alive? Oh, the wicked are whatever. People still say these things and pray these things to God. And God hears their cry. Or then consider Jonah. I love the story of Jonah. And I love the story of Jonah because it just makes me laugh. Because he is so fifth grade girl in this story. He has such indignation at God's mercy for the people of Nineveh, and it makes him so mad. And God responded a bit like God did for Job. Well, why shouldn't I look compassionately at the people of Nineveh and their livestock? And that's the end of the story. I love that. Or what about the poor disciples in the boat? In Matthew 8, we read that a windstorm arose on the sea, and there's that windstorm again. So great that their boat was in danger of being swamped by the waves, but Jesus was asleep. And they went and they woke him up, saying, "Lord, save us, we are perishing." And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, you of little faith?" And then he got up and he rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a dead calm. Okay, here's another one. Think of Mary and Martha. Not Mary and Martha in the house and Martha saying to Jesus, "Get Mary to start working," because she's just listening. No, this is another story of Mary and Martha. I just love what they both say when they see Jesus after their brother Lazarus dies. They both say, "Lord, if you had been here, he would not have died." How often do we hear people who are grieving say that? How often do we think that? If only God had been here, if only Jesus had been here, if only I had been here, if only such and such and such. What did Jesus do after hearing Mary say these words to him? Shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. Think of Thomas. Poor Thomas always gets the bad rap. He must have gone out for food the first time when the disciples saw the risen Lord in that locked room. "We have seen the Lord," they insisted. But like Job, Jonah, the psalmist, the disciples in the boat, even Mary and Martha, Thomas didn't back down. He said his questions. He challenged God. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my fingers in the nail marks where they were, put my hand in his side, I'm not going to believe this." In her commentary on these verses in Job, Reverend Meg Genesta writes, "We like to call this man Doubting Thomas, but if we're honest, we recognize ourselves in his prayer. We recognize the faith and the doubt that do not cancel each other out. The faith and doubt that live together in the human heart. Thomas dared God to show up, and God took him on that dare." In that locked upper room, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your fingers here, see my hands. Reach out your hand, put it to my side. Stop doubting and believe." God in Christ graciously enabled Thomas to profess, "My Lord and my God." Here we are, folks. We are standing today in a long line of lamenters, doubters, questioners, wrestlers like Job and Jacob and Jonah and Mary and Martha, the psalmist, the disciples, and Thomas, and me and you. Our grief and our fear or doubt or all of the above all at once, whatever it is, however it is felt, is just as valid as these. And like these, when we finally hear from God, in whatever way God speaks to us, there may be some conversation, and maybe there is some rebuke, and you likely will be put back in your place. But it is a place of love, not disgrace, where what you say and who you are is valued and honored. And to us, God replies, "Yes, I can hear you now. I hear you because I am the world's creator. And like Job, you are my creation. I hear you because you are my people. I created you to have a head on your shoulders and wonder in your brain. I hear when you come to me, like the psalmist, with all your emotions of your burdened hearts. I join with you in nights of restless wrestling for the truth. I bring hope in places of doubt, and I weep with you in your grief." We are faith descendants of these great characters who have taught us that there will be storms and whirlwinds. There will be times when we get it all horribly wrong, or when life seems to give us all the most awful stuff. But always we are enough. Always we can come to God and lay it all down and say, "Hey, God, here it is." We can do that again and again and again and